My hands won't stop shaking. I'm sitting in my car in the parking garage outside my office, engine off, staring at a text message from my mother that I've read 4 times already. The words aren't changing no matter how many times I look at them. We already put down the deposit. Your name is on everything. This is what families do for each other. I set my phone face down on the passenger seat and pressed both palms flat against my thighs. $54,000. My name. A venue I never agreed to. I need to back up. I'm 31 years old. I've been the responsible one my entire life. Not because anyone asked me to be, not explicitly, but because someone had to be, and it was always going to be me. My brother is 2 years older and has somehow managed to remain the family golden boy despite the fact that I was the one who got the scholarship. I was the one who moved back home for 8 months when my father had his knee surgery. And I was the one who quietly paid my parents' water bill for 6 months in 2021 when things got tight and nobody wanted to say it out loud. None of that is a complaint. I want to be clear about that. I love my family. That's why it took me so long to see what was actually happening. My brother got engaged 18 months before I did. His fiancée, I'll call her my sister-in-law because that's what she is now, is perfectly nice. Genuinely, she's not the villain of this story. They got married in a small ceremony at a vineyard about 40 minutes outside the city, and it was lovely and I cried and everything was fine. Then, 8 months later, I got engaged. My partner and I had been together for 4 years. He proposed on a Tuesday night in our kitchen while pasta was boiling on the stove, and I said yes before he finished the sentence. We weren't people who needed a production. What I wanted was something real. A real dinner with people we actually loved. Music we actually liked. Flowers that didn't cost more than my monthly rent. I started planning almost immediately because that's who I am. I found a venue, a restored farmhouse about 20 miles outside town that held up to 80 guests and cost $4,200 to rent for a full Saturday. I put down a deposit. I started a spreadsheet. I was happy. That should have been the end of my involvement with anyone else's plans. It wasn't. The first sign came at Sunday dinner. Maybe 6 weeks after I got engaged, my mother made her pot roast, the good one with the pearl onions, and everyone was in a good mood. And somewhere between the main course and dessert, my father said casually, "The way you'd mention the weather. Your brother and his wife are coming up on their first anniversary in the spring. We should do something special." I agreed. Of course. A first anniversary is worth celebrating. "We were thinking a party," my mother said. "Something nice." "That sounds great," I said. "Like a dinner?" There was a pause. My mother looked at my father. My father looked at his pot roast. "We were thinking something bigger." My mother said, "Since you're already planning a wedding, it might make sense to coordinate." I put my fork down. Coordinate how? Just share the day. Share the space. It would be so much more efficient. I want to describe the feeling I had in that moment, but I'm not sure I have the right words for it. It wasn't quite anger. It was more like the feeling you get when you step off a curb that's slightly higher than you expected. That half second of your body realizing the ground isn't where you thought it was. "I already have a venue booked," I said, "for 80 people. "Yes, but your brother's anniversary is a milestone." "It's their first anniversary," I said. "That's not a milestone." My mother's expression shifted in the particular way it does when she's decided I'm being difficult. "I know that look. I've been seeing it since I was 9 years old. We just thought it would be meaningful," she said. "Family together. Everyone celebrating at once." I said I'd think about it. I didn't mean it when I said it, but I said it because saying it bought me time, and time was the one thing I knew I needed. I thought maybe I'd misunderstood. That happened sometimes with my family. Things got floated and then quietly dropped, especially when I didn't engage with them directly. I went home that night and told my partner what had happened, and he made a face and said, "That's not going to happen, right?" And I said, "No, obviously not." And we both went back to watching television, and I genuinely believed the matter was closed. It was not closed. Over the next 3 weeks, my mother brought it up twice more, once in a phone call about something else entirely, where it was dropped into the conversation so casually I almost missed it, and once in a text that said, "Have you thought any more about the spring celebration?" as though she'd forgotten she'd already reframed my wedding as a joint event without my consent. I kept saying I'd think about it. I kept not thinking about it, because thinking about it meant having to have a real conversation, and I was not yet ready for that conversation. What I didn't know was that my family had already stopped waiting for my answer. I found out the way I find out most things in my family, by accident, through information that was meant for someone else. My partner and I had dinner with his cousin, who works in event catering, and she mentioned in passing that she'd gotten an inquiry for a spring wedding anniversary event, large scale, and the name on the inquiry was my last name. She thought it was funny, a coincidence. I asked her how large. She said the inquiry listed 220 guests. I drove home in complete silence. My partner kept glancing at me from the passenger seat, and I kept staring at the road because if I looked at him, I was going to start crying, and I didn't want to do that until I knew exactly what I was crying about. When we got home, I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and I started making calls. The farmhouse venue, the one I'd booked, the one where I'd put down my $4,200 deposit, confirmed that yes, they'd received a call requesting a change to the booking. The event had been expanded to a full outdoor reception, a catered dinner, a live band, and an open bar, and the revised quote was currently sitting at just over $54,000. The contact name on the revised inquiry? Mine. My phone number. My email address. The one my mother knew because I'd never thought to hide it. I asked the venue coordinator if anyone had confirmed or signed anything yet. She said not yet. They were waiting on the signed contract and the first deposit installment. I thanked her and hung up. I sat there for a long time. Have you ever had a moment where you realize the situation is so much worse than you thought, but also, and you don't fully understand this until later? You're calmer than you expected to be. That's what happened to me. The panic I'd been bracing for didn't arrive. Something else arrived instead. Something quieter. I closed my laptop. I went to bed. I did not call my mother. The next morning, I called the venue back. I spoke to the same coordinator, and I told her I needed to clarify something. No changes to this booking had been authorized by me, and any correspondence she'd received from my email address in the past 3 weeks should be considered unauthorized. She was very professional about it. She said she'd note it in the file. I asked her one more thing. If someone were to sign a contract in my name without my authorization, what would happen? She said, carefully, that would be a matter for their legal team. I thanked her again. Then I called my bank, and I asked them to flag any unusual activity on my account and to call me before processing any large transactions. The woman I spoke to asked if I'd noticed anything suspicious. I told her I was being proactive. I did not call my mother that day, or the next day. I let her call me. She called on a Thursday evening, cheerful, asking how the wedding planning was going, whether I'd made any decisions about the catering yet. I said I was still working through some details. She said, well, don't wait too long. Things book up fast in the spring. I said, I know, Mom. I said nothing else. Here's what I want you to understand about why I didn't confront her immediately. It wasn't cowardice. I know it might look that way from the outside. I've read enough of those comments. The ones that say, why didn't she just say no? The ones that say she let this happen to herself. I understand why someone who's never been inside a family like mine would think that. But when you grow up in a system where your no has never been treated as a complete sentence, when every boundary you've tried to set has been reframed as selfishness, as betrayal, as you thinking you're better than everyone, you learn that a direct confrontation doesn't end the situation. It just starts a different, longer, louder version of it, one where you're suddenly the villain for not wanting to share your wedding day with your brother's first anniversary. I wasn't going to have that fight. I was going to do something more effective. I was going to let them finish building the trap, and then I was going to walk out of it. My partner and I had a very honest conversation about 3 weeks before the date they'd been planning around. I told him everything. The venue inquiry, the email, the 220 guests. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I told him. He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Okay. Tell me what you need from me." I've thought about that moment a lot since then. The way he didn't try to fix it for me, didn't tell me I was overreacting or that I should try talking to them one more time. Just ask what I needed. I think that's when I knew, not for the first time but more clearly than ever, that I was marrying exactly the right person. We called the farmhouse venue and we canceled the booking entirely. We forfeited the $4,200 deposit. That was money I'd saved, and I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt to lose it. It hurt. But I already knew what I was doing with the money I was saving. My mother called me on a Tuesday, 4 days before the date, voice bright, asking if I'd finalized the guest meal preferences yet for the caterer. I said I was still working on it. She said the venue needed to know by end of week. I said, "I'll make sure everything is handled, Mom." That was true. It just wasn't what she thought I meant. We got married on a Saturday morning. Not at the farmhouse, not at the venue my family had quietly rearranged my life around. At a small botanical garden, 30 miles in the opposite direction, which we had booked under my partner's name only 6 weeks earlier for $3,000, and which held exactly 41 people, every single one of whom had been personally chosen by us, personally called by us, and personally asked not to share the date or location with anyone outside the list. 41 people who loved us. That was it. I wore the dress I'd chosen 8 months ago, before any of this started. My best friend from college did my hair in her apartment at 7 in the morning, and we drank terrible coffee from paper cups. And she cried before I did. The flowers were local and simple, white ranunculus and eucalyptus, and they cost less than $200. My partner cried when I walked toward him. I cried. The officiant cried a little too and apologized for it, which made everyone laugh. We took photos in the garden. We had lunch at a restaurant we'd reserved the private room at. We danced to 3 songs. By 4 in the afternoon, we were in a car headed to the airport for a flight we'd booked 4 months ago, and I was someone's wife, and the world felt very quiet and very correct. At the farmhouse, 40 miles away, my family arrived at 6 o'clock in the evening to a venue that had no record of their event. I know this because my cousin, one of the 41, someone I trust completely, texted me while we were waiting to board our flight. She'd gotten a call from my mother. "She's furious," my cousin wrote. "I know," I wrote back. "She keeps saying the contract. There is no contract," I wrote. "I never signed anything. I called the venue 6 weeks ago and canceled the original booking. Anything they tried to add after that wasn't authorized." There was a pause. "Oh," my cousin wrote. "Yeah," I wrote. "Are you okay?" I looked out the window at the tarmac. My partner had his hand over mine on the armrest. I thought about the botanical garden. I thought about the 41 people who had shown up at 8 in the morning on a Saturday and danced with us and eaten lunch and hugged us on their way out. I thought about the coffee in paper cups and my friend's face when she finished my hair and said, "You look exactly like you." "I'm really okay," I wrote back. And I meant it. My mother called me 7 times while we were in the air. She left 2 voicemails, both of which I listened to when we landed. The first one was bewildered, confused about what had happened, asking me to call her. The second one was different. Angrier. There was a phrase in it that I keep coming back to. "We did all of this for you." I've thought about that a lot since then. All of this? The 220 guests I didn't know, the $54,000 in my name, the anniversary celebration folded into my wedding day without a single conversation where I actually said yes, all of that was for me. I don't say this with bitterness anymore. I genuinely believe she believed it. I think my mother has spent so long equating scale with love. Bigger must mean more. More people must mean more joy. A grander event must mean a grander commitment. That she couldn't understand why I would want anything smaller, quieter. Mine. I called her back 4 days later, from our hotel room, sitting on the edge of the bed while my partner was in the shower. I told her we'd gotten married. I told her it was small and it was beautiful and I was happy. I told her I was sorry she was hurt. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I just wanted to be there." And that broke something open in me that I wasn't expecting. Because the thing is, she could have been there. 41 people were there. She was not one of them. And that was a choice I had made, and it was the right choice. But it wasn't painless. It was never going to be painless. "I know," I said. "I know you did." We talked for a while after that. Not everything got resolved. Things like this don't resolve in a single phone call. But something shifted. Something small. Something I'm still watching carefully, not sure yet what it will become. My brother called me the following week. I expected anger. What I got was something closer to quiet. He said, "Mom told me what happened." I said, "I figured she would." He said, "I didn't know they were doing all of that. The venue, the contract. I didn't know my name was part of it." I believed him. My brother is not a schemer. He's just always been the one who floats above the consequences while the rest of us sort them out. Not from malice, just from having been allowed to. For the first time, standing in the wreckage of something with his name attached to it, he sounded uncomfortable in a way I'd never quite heard before. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what it's worth." "It's worth something," I told him, and I meant that too. That was 7 months ago. My partner and I just moved into a house, a real one with a yard, and last weekend we had people over for dinner, 8 of the 41. My best friend who did my hair, a couple we've known since college, my partner's sister, who I've always liked, and her husband, who makes everyone laugh without trying. It was loud and simple, and the food wasn't fancy and nobody cried, which made it different from the wedding, and also exactly the same in every way that mattered. My mother and I are in a different place than we were. Careful. Slower. She came to visit last month and we had lunch, just the two of us, and she asked to see photos from the botanical garden. I showed her. She was quiet for a long time looking at them. Then she said, "You do look happy." "I am," I said. She nodded. She handed my phone back. She didn't say anything else about it, and neither did I. I don't know what the next few years look like with my family. I'm not going to pretend I have it figured out, but I know this. I stood in a garden on a Saturday morning, surrounded by 41 people who chose to be there, and I married someone who asked me what I needed instead of telling me what I should want. And when I walked back to the car afterward, I felt, for maybe the first time in my adult life, like my own life actually belonged to me. That's not a small thing. That's everything. I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between keeping the peace and keeping yourself. For most of my 20s, I confused the two. I thought that being a good daughter meant absorbing whatever my family needed. That being responsible meant being available. That love looked like saying yes, even when every part of you was saying something else entirely. I was good at it. I got so good at it that I stopped noticing I was doing it. The thing about that kind of pattern is that it doesn't announce itself. Nobody sits you down and says, "We're going to teach you that your needs matter less than ours." It just happens slowly, in 100 small moments. The Sunday dinner where your objection gets talked over, the phone call where a plan gets described to you as though you'd already agreed, the text message that arrives and assumes your answer before you've given one. And because each individual moment is small, you tell yourself it's not worth making a thing of. You smile and nod. You sigh, think about it. You think about it. And then you do nothing. I did nothing for a long time. I want to be honest about that. The version of this story where I was just a victim waiting to be wronged is not quite true. I participated in my own erasure, slowly over years, by choosing comfort over clarity every single time the two came into conflict. That's not self-blame, it's just what's true, and I think there's something important in that truth, because the moment I actually understood, it was the moment things started to shift. What my parents did was not okay. Booking a $54,000 event in my name, attaching my contact information, assuming I would simply comply because I always had, that crossed a line that can't be uncrossed just by saying, "We did it for you." Intention doesn't dissolve consequence. Loving someone and overriding their choices at the same time is a contradiction, and no amount of pot roast and Sunday dinners makes it less of one. But here's what I also know. I didn't fight back by becoming someone I wasn't. I didn't blow up the family at dinner. I didn't send an angry email. I didn't do any of the things that would have felt satisfying for about 45 seconds and then turned into a years-long wound. I just stopped. Stopped waiting for permission. Stopped building my happiness inside the architecture of their expectations. I made one phone call. I booked a different venue. I invited 41 people who actually knew me. That's not a dramatic act, but it required something I'd never quite managed before, the willingness to let someone be disappointed in me and not fix it. My partner asked me what I needed and I told him the truth. That was the beginning. My brother said he was sorry and I believed him. That was the middle. My mother looked at the photos and said I looked happy. That was something closer to an end than I expected. None of it was clean. None of it resolved the way stories resolve. But I stood in a garden on a Saturday morning and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was living my actual life and not just managing everyone else's version of it. I think that's what it means to finally grow up inside your own story. Not to win. Not to punish anyone. Just to stop shrinking. And see what's left when you don't.